Good evening. Welcome and thanks for choosing to spend the next 30 minutes with us to talk about a very important topic, mental illness and trauma. Unsilenced, mental illness and trauma do not discriminate. Joining me tonight is Julie Riley, and Julie will share her family's very personal story and the importance of preventing relapse and aftercare. Julie and her husband Steve are the founders of Maddie's House. St. Al's is also very fortunate to have Dr. Sorter as one of our lead psychiatrists for our children and families. He is the director of the Division of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry at Children's Hospital, as well as supervisors multiple residents that also provide psychiatric service at St. Al's. Also, Kristen McLean from the Vivid Ink Company will be capturing our conversation today in an illustrated model. She will not be here, but however, she will be listening to everything we're saying. And she works with companies and individuals and organizations to transform content into lasting and actionable works of art. We will be sharing illustrations of this conversation tomorrow on social media, so look out. I would like to also thank Carter Kennedy for monitoring our dialogue tonight. Please feel free to post questions and comments. As our discussion comes to a close tonight, Carter will present questions and comments to tonight's panel. I am Linda Hart, the Executive Director of St. Al's. I have worked in the field of mental health and education for over 35 years. St. Al's is a very special place to me. It also has historical significance in Cincinnati, and its mission and vision is about serving our most vulnerable children and families. St. Al's was founded as an orphanage in 1837 to aid the children left homeless as a result of Cincinnati's cholera epidemic. We are no longer an orphanage. However, we have served children for over 185 years and will continue to serve the most vulnerable. Our children suffer from severe trauma and adverse childhood experiences such as abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction, which is the heart of their mental diagnosis. So often, trauma goes undetected and the child and family's voice is silenced. St. Al's is facing another pandemic, and it has increased the silence. With many children on remote learning, their support systems have been abruptly shut off, and new barriers have occurred to access of care. We all face challenges as we are thrown out of balance. However, the stigma of coping with an adverse event and coping with mental illness can create a feeling of shame or judgment from others. Stigma can even come from an internal place. Many of our children confuse feeling bad as I am bad, and they are also perceived that way. I assure you, these children at St. Al's and our children who have suffered from trauma and severe mental illness are not bad children. They want to be loved, feel hope like any other child, and they are so deserving of it. Can you imagine continually feeling judged or ashamed because something bad happened to you? Navigating life with a mental health condition is tough enough, and the isolation, blame, and secrecy that is often encouraged by stigma can create huge challenges to reaching out and getting the necessary supports. Stigma is toxic to a person's mental health because it creates an environment of shame, fear, silence that prevents many from seeking help and treatment. At St. Al's, we recognize and respond to the impact trauma and adverse childhood experiences has on our children and families. St. Al's is dedicated to supporting them through their healing journey. and providing an opportunity for our children and families to grow and thrive. St. Al's provides a variety of services from mental health assessments, outpatient care, case management, on-site therapeutic services, specialized education, med management, and school-based therapies for children ages 5 to 18. We also specialize in trauma-informed care. Mental health care is a long-term commitment that helps a young person and family overcome obstacles to grow and develop. At St. Al's, we are dedicated to transforming lives for a lifetime. Tonight is about unsilencing. It's about listening, learning, supporting, and healing. Mental illness and trauma do not discriminate. We have the pleasure of having Julie Riley here, who's going to tell us a very personal story, how trauma and mental illness affected her family. Julie?
Linda, thank you so much. And boy, I listened to every word and hung on to everything you said, because we lived that. Madison suffered in silence. We didn't even know what was going on because of the trauma that she suffered, that she kept from her family for 3 years, until she finally, in a rehab, finally told us really what happened. So I'm going to tell you the story of my daughter, Madison. She's behind me. There's Madison. I'll grab Madison real quick. Madison was a beautiful girl. She was 24 years old when she lost her battle with addiction and mental illness. And Madison started when she was a younger girl at 12 years old, and she was sexually abused. And the boy threatened her from telling us and her grandfather, who was the sheriff, Hamilton County Sheriff Simon Lease. And she was afraid he threatened to hurt her family, her sister, her brothers, or even her grandfather, which unimaginable, thinking, this guy, this younger, a couple years older than Madison. And Madison started to use drugs. She started to try and numb her kind of PTSD from this sexual encounter that just rocked her world, and that as parents, we had no idea. And she started using marijuana to numb herself. And, as parents, we thought, oh my goodness, she's going down the road of, addiction and drugs. But it was really stemmed from this horrific, traumatic experience at such a young age that we did not find out until later in her down the road of the addiction and mental illness that she suffered. Madison, her freshman year at high school, this happened right before she started in high school. She's the summer of her 8th grade year. And she that freshman year was very hard for her. And she actually tried to attempt suicide her freshman year. And that's when her sister found her. She had just taken all the pills in our home, and she had cut her wrist severely, and 911 was called, and we were on our road to what was hell from 14 years of age until she lost her life at 24. So 8 years we suffered. She went in and out of rehabs. We just thought it was drug addiction. She'd come out, she'd have nowhere to go. They'd tell her to go to AA, NA. Well, at young girls' ages, I went to meetings with her, 90 meetings in 90 days I went to, and very hard to relate to an NA meeting or an AA meeting when you're a young, girl in high school. Madison was at Oak Hills for her first year, and with this group of kind of the boys that was the one that abused her. We decided to send her to another school. So she went to another high school. She went to Taylor High School. And then that kind of group followed her down there. And then we went to Mother Mercy High School, and we thought we were kind of safe, but they kind of followed her. It's this, once that starts down that road, they just keep coming back. And she finally, her junior year, we sent her away to another rehab. Her first rehab was in Texas because they told us, send her out of town, get her out of town, find a new beginning for Madison. So we sent her away to a wonderful place in Texas. We thought, and she was there for about 6 months, and she came home and, you know, went back to the same people, same group, kind of started bullying and using Madison. We didn't know they would take things from Madison. She would say she lost her phone. Well, no, they took her phone from her. So it was just this litany of one thing after another. And then she started using cocaine, thought cocaine would make her feel a little better. And that didn't help. It just, no, we didn't treat the trauma. We didn't know until she finally admitted when she was close to 18 years old, and she was in a group at one of the rehabs that she was in. And she finally told the story of what had happened to her when she was younger. And, you know, as you all know, the course would have been a lot different if we would have known this early on, but they're afraid to tell. Like you said, Linda, they keep it to themselves. They silence themselves. They suffer in silence. And, you know, Madison turned to drugs to try and make her feel better. Her drugs of choice were marijuana and cocaine the whole time. But when she finally admitted what had happened to her, then it was with the family. We went to therapy. We went to therapy with her. She started down different roads to therapy, but her mental health and all the medications that the doctors tried to put her on, that was a whole trying to find out what worked and what didn't work. And then she'd experiment with, you know, the marijuana and the cocaine in between. So trying to find that right kind of cocktail medication recipe was really, really hard for us. And Madison, her mental health just kept getting worse and worse. And her PTSD, she'd, you know, wake in the middle of the night crying with the visions that night and relive that night. And it just got so much for Madison, so much for our family. And just, you know, Madison had 2 older brothers and an older sister. Actually, what am I saying? An older brother, an older sister, and a younger brother. And watching them watch her, and just Stephen and I, and just the different rehabs, and we went to about 6 different rehabs. Madison's big thing was, her last rehab was at Sibsey House at Lindner Center, which was done a great place. But she looked at me, or, you know, she went in for her 28-day rehab, and she said, "Mom, I don't know why you're putting me in. Why are you putting me in? I can teach rehab. I can teach it, Mom. I know exactly what they're going to do. I know how long I'm going to be here. I know what's expected of me. It's, Mom, it's when I get out. I don't have that place. I don't have that safe place to go. And NA and AA are great. They're a great place to be for an hour. But what about the other time? You know, what about the other time? I need a place to go." So she always told me, I need that place. I need a place to go be with people that understand me, that are trying to stay clean and sober, that are trying to keep their mental health in check. And so I didn't listen to Madison when she was here on earth, but I'm certainly listening to her now that she's up in heaven. And that's why our family is starting Maddie's House. So it is a relapse prevention and mental health community center that you'll just be able to show up. There's going to be no cost. It's going to be a place you can show up, you can hang out, you can do an art therapy group, you can go to the music room and play, you can go have exercise, you can go to NA and AA groups. There's going to be lots of therapy, meditation therapy, aromatherapy, everything under the sun. But the biggest thing that Madison always said was, on the weekends, there's nothing for me to do. I can't go to bars. I can't go to concerts. I can't hang out with this group. I got to find that new group. And they always, at the end of rehab, change people, places, and things. Change people, places, and things. And that's a really, really hard thing to do, especially when you're a young adult. So Maddie's House will provide a space to change people, place, and things. It'll be a place you can go to that will have other young adults that will have suffered in some form of mental illness or addiction, so that they really can understand what you are going through. I don't have mental illness. I don't have addiction, but Madison did. And it's really hard for us that don't have those diseases, as we know, to really understand what's in their head and what does she mean when she feels like the TV's talking to her, or her head, her brain can't turn off. She's just having these racing thoughts. She's like, Mom, my head is having thoughts that just go around and around. I don't have that. You don't have that, Linda. Doctor, we don't have that. Carter doesn't have that. But she did. And talking to somebody that has that can say, oh yeah, I know exactly what you're saying. I know exactly what you're saying. So with all that Madison went through, I know the other part about Madison was a child that she gave shoes off of her feet one night. She'd give anything to anybody. She loved helping other people before she loved helping herself. So I know it's a weird thing to say, but I know if she was in a room and God was talking to her and God said, one of you has to go. And if you go and you come and be in heaven with me, all these other people are going to have their lives. We're going to put them on a good path. And I know that is exactly where my Madison is, and she's up there being the biggest cheerleader. We've had so many great things happen with Maddie's house already, and her annex will open. That's phase 1 on Black Friday, the day after Thanksgiving. So we're really excited about that. You can go to our website, maddyshousescincy.org, and you can find out all about us and where we are. And Madison is she's going to save a lot of people. She's already saved one. She saved our program director, Dana. I met her at a focus group when Madison died. I went to all her rehabs and I did focus groups, and I told all the people that were in at that time what Madison's idea was and tell me, will this help you? And all of them said, please open Maddie's house. One young lady grabbed me, and I'll never forget her face. And she grabbed my arm and she said, please open Maddie's house. I'm afraid I'm going to die next. And I will never forget her face. And it's Dana, and she's our program. She's our program director. So we're excited about that.
Julie, thank you so much for sharing this personal story. And I know it's difficult, but you really unsilenced Maddie. You gave her vision. She's now given her voice. And you're right. It's hard for us to understand it, but that's why we need to be here and hear it. So
yes.
Thank you for unsilencing Maddie.
You're welcome. Well, thank you for allowing me to share, and thanks for listening.
And Dr. Sorter is going to speak next. And Dr. Sorter has really led St. Al's to having a good understanding of childhood adverse experiences and trauma, and how that really leads into some mental illness. So Dr. Sorter?
Sure. Well, thank you. And just want to check a little bit on our time.
Yeah.
Are we okay with about 10 minutes still?
Yes,
about
10 minutes, yeah.
Very good. So anyway, I just wanted to take a few minutes and talk as I can about trauma to you, and then also about the adverse childhood experiences. And I think the first thing is to realize, especially when you're dealing with so many of the young people in the community that have complex mental health problems, is when you start looking closer, trauma is often a core piece of what's led to where they are and the difficulties. And trauma comes in multiple forms. It can be bullying behavior, it can be exposure to community violence, it could be exposure to violence in the home or partner violence. It can also be medical trauma or physical abuse, sexual abuse. One I want to talk maybe a little bit more about is what we call complex trauma, which is oftentimes where those households where kids are growing up, where maybe that they're not protected and they really don't provide the consistent safety and comfort. So they're exposed to perhaps multiple episodes of trauma in a variety of forms. In many ways, people try to adapt to that when you're growing up, that even as a child. And so you develop responses that perhaps work in that home, in that adverse situation, but then really do not work outside of that. And so as a child grows up and encounters situations, relationships that are safe, the adaptations they were trying to make in those dangerous homes perhaps are no longer helpful and usually are counterproductive. And we're going to talk a little bit about really what those impacts are for kids. In many ways is that one of the first things it does is it harms attachment and how we have relationships in the future. Relationships with important attachment figures, really children learn to trust people, and they learn how to regulate their emotions by having those contacts. And when those are stripped away because perhaps they're in a dangerous situation, they oftentimes don't achieve those milestones about how to really relate and attach to others. So that when a primary caregivers exploit or abuse a child, the child oftentimes feels that they're bad, that the world's a terrible place. And the majority of abused and neglected kids have difficulty really developing attachments to the caregivers, whether it's there or they go to different caregivers in the future. They have trouble really expressing their emotions, may oftentimes react violently or inappropriately to situations. And our ability to really to develop healthy, supportive relationships with friends and significant others really is oftentimes embedded in how we had these first experiences when we were very young. So a child with complex trauma often have problems with romantic relationships. They have problems in friendships, problems with trust, trouble with authority figures, and oftentimes really they oftentimes may even have trouble with authority. They may have trouble with emotional responses too. Children who have experienced complex trauma often have trouble identifying, expressing, or managing emotions. And they have limited really language oftentimes and even labeling basic feelings that they have and talking to others about it. So it makes it harder for them to process what's happening. They oftentimes really internalize or externalize stress reactions, and as a result have oftentimes a lot of depression, anxiety, and anger at much higher levels than other young people. And that another way that they oftentimes learn to deal with trauma is to become numb. And that they almost have to be numb so they don't respond to all the threats in the environment. And when they become numb like that, then they don't oftentimes realize when they're in a dangerous situation. And so sometimes they become victims over and over again because they really don't oftentimes perceive the dangerous situations they go into, or they just don't get that feedback. They don't become afraid like they should. It's so often when I work with young people that have been traumatized where they do these outlandish things or they run away or they do things. I go, aren't you afraid? And they say, no. And here I think I would be scared. And most people I know would just be scared to death to be on the street or be in a situation where they might be harmed. And you realize there's this basic problem with how they develop emotions and fear. Their behavior, of course, can be very disruptive. They have a lot of trouble with self-regulation and they really lack impulse control frequently. And so they really don't think about consequences oftentimes before they act out. And so as a result, they're oftentimes making the same mistakes over and over again where they get into trouble. And oftentimes they are, oppositional or volatile because they feel like they don't understand why we're trying to control them or trying to kind of limit these disruptive behaviors because a lot of times they don't perceive the dangerousness of it. And the traumatized kids are more likely to engage in high-risk behaviors such as self-harm, unsafe sexual practices, excessive risk-taking, whether it's even driving and or running away or disappearing from authority figures. And they're more likely also to get involved with the illegal activities, alcohol, substance abuse, as we heard, assaulting others, stealing, running away. And so they're oftentimes their kids really put themselves in high-risk situations over and over again. Another real strike they get is their learning suffers. And that the kids with complex trauma have problems with thinking clearly, reasoning, that they have trouble kind of really anticipating or planning ahead for the future. And frequently, as a result, it's very hard for them sometimes to learn new skills to how to do better. So in schools, because they can't pay attention or their curiosity just isn't around those type of issues, they oftentimes have school failure and great difficulty progressing. We also see with early trauma that even language suffers. And the development of basic language skills is oftentimes far behind other people. And one other point is really about self-concept and future orientation. It's really well known that people that suffer trauma oftentimes can't really project into the future. It's almost like a here and now, and oftentimes really struggle envisioning themselves even living for a long period of time. Because in some ways, the future is so much diminished from what perhaps other people have, where we think about going to school and having a certain job or a career or relationships. Because they've been frustrated or traumatized when they take those steps, they oftentimes can't envision something positive. And so as a result, don't have those guiding principles that really help us get through difficult times. I mean, you think about how do we get through difficult times? We get through them because we see something positive at the end. We can't see it, then things become kind of worthless or hopeless in a way. And so we can't really muster the energy or the resilience to get there. One of the things that we do talk about is adverse childhood experiences. And what these are referred to are things that happen in early childhood or during your childhood that can cause great difficulty. We'll explain what they are here in a minute. The other thing I want you to kind of, besides the ACEs, is the terminology for them, is a thing called epigenetics. And what epigenetics is that's really the study of how genes get modified by the environment. And so they get expressed differently. Because one of the things we're going to talk about here very quickly is how experience of adverse experience early in childhood or during childhood changes physical outcomes. And so people in many ways thought, well, this is not possible. But we really know that even experiences, traumatic experiences, can change the way certain genes are expressed, whether it's around appetite or the way we do fat deposition, lipid metabolism. We're knowing more and more about this because there's been some landmark studies that we will talk about in a second that show early experiences of trauma put you at higher risk for not only mental health and emotional problems later in life, but also physical problems. And epigenetics is probably the way it happens. So one of the things is that these ACE scores are really based on these early experiences. So many of them are around household dysfunction, such as substance abuse, parent or separation or divorce, having a parent or a loved one with mental illness, seeing a battered parent, especially a battered mother, physical violence in the home, or criminal behavior by one of the parents or the guardian. That could be actually being a victim of abuse, whether it's sexual abuse, physical abuse, or psychological abuse. And then, of course, just basic neglect, emotional neglect, or physical neglect. And these happen much more commonly than we think. Oftentimes, household dysfunction, about 27% of people grow up with someone with substance abuse in the household. Very common. And when we look at really people in general, if you look at only about 35% of people in total have 0 ACEs. The majority have at 1 or more. And when we look at people that have 4 or more, then really the difficult things really start to happen, where we really see significant impacts. And the regretful thing is that about 15% of women have 4 or more ACEs, and it's about 12% of men. And regretfully, when you have 4 or more ACEs, you have about 3 times the risk of significant lung disease and adult smoking than people with less than 4 ACEs. You have 11 times the level of chances of being an intravenous drug abuser. You have 14 times the risk of suicide attempts. You're 4 times as likely to have had sexual relations before the age of 15. So these kids oftentimes are growing up way too fast. You're almost 5 times more likely to suffer from depression and things such as even liver disease. You're about twice as likely to have that. You're also at much higher risk for heart disease. And so early obesity, you're also at much higher risk for. And so things such as early stroke and other types of significant medical problems are associated with these ACEs. And regretfully, if you have 6 or more ACEs, most of those people die 20 years earlier than what they should. So it actually can shorten the lifespan. And so it's such a tragic issue that what we see is 1/8 of the population has 4 or more ACEs, 2/3 have at least 1. So these are having significant impacts on all of us. And so what I would conclude with is to say, the big thing is that at this point in time is we have to recognize these issues and how pervasive they are in our society, and how there is this biological impact. That experience basically changes the expression of biology. The hope in that is, though, is by changing the experience, you can reverse a lot of those trends. And that's what we're seeing more and more evidence about. Intensive treatment can reverse a lot of those effects of trauma, and that people can regain their lives and oftentimes get back on a positive trajectory where they can be happy and productive and have fulfilling lives in the future. And so that's why it's so important to recognize these issues early, get young people and families in treatment, because treatment really does work. And we're able to really change the kind of a script of devastation and difficulty frequently to one of positive recovery. And so I'll stop there and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Sorter and Julie. You know, those of you listening on, you know, on Facebook, I hope you really get a good, complete picture of what we're trying to discuss here. And particularly, really, it is, like Dr. Sorter saying, is we need to be unsilence our children, unsilence mental illness, because that is the way they need to get help and care. There is hope in this. And, you know, as Julie mentioned, Maddie gave us hope for all of us. Unfortunately, Maddie took her life for us to listen, but that's what, you know, we need to start listening and start looking at what that care is and understanding trauma better. Carter, is there any comments from the Facebook Live that they would like us to address or questions?
We do have time for a question. We have a question from Kara, and I'd like to ask this to both Dr. Sorter and to Julie. What is the best advice that you can give to a child experiencing mental health issues? And I'd like to bring that up to Dr. Sorter first.
Well, I think that the first thing is to make sure you talk with your parents about it. The last thing we want to do is have people suffer in silence. It's to talk to your parents, or if your parents won't listen, talk to a school teacher, talk to someone you trust. Ask for help. Reach out and ask for help. There's a lot of people, and actually we're in a much better place now than we've ever been before, with people having knowledge and the willingness to help. And so if you're at school, talk to the teacher or counselor. If you're at home, make sure you mention it to your mother. Talk to the pediatrician or your doctor. The big issue is to get someone in there, start listening to what you're going through, and really helping you recover.
Thank you, Dr. Sorter. Julie, same question. What advice would you give to a child that's experiencing mental health issues?
Well, I think now we're doing much better with this subject nowadays. I mean, I really feel things like this, unsilencing, talking about how you feel, what you're feeling. You know, it's 1 in 5 people have some form of addiction, mental illness. I think that's kind of the statistics I keep getting thrown. And, you know, you're not alone. You're not the only one out there. There's a lot of other children that are suffering too. And I think that was the biggest thing with Madison. Is first she thought she didn't want to tell anybody anything because she didn't want to be different. She wanted to be like everybody else. But, you know, there's a lot of kids out there that are also suffering, and you got to talk about it. You got to get out there. I agree with everything Dr. Sorensen said. It's getting out there, talking about it, and getting the help that you need, and not keeping it to yourself. Got to talk about it.
Thank you so much, Julie. Linda, if you don't have anything else to add, I'll begin to wrap this up.
That'd be great. Thank you very much.
All right, well, thank you to Dr. Sorter. Thank you, Julie. We really want to encourage everyone to, if they want to learn more about Maddie's House or to St. Al's, go to stalschildren.org or maddieshousecincy.org. Like us on our social media channels to continue the discussion of Unsilenced. And thank you to everyone that is currently and will tune into this discussion.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sorter, and thank you, Julie, for being here tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure.